years ago, I was on one of my return trips from Russia, and I was hubbing through some Western European airport. I can't remember which one. When I noticed a Middle Eastern couple pointing a clearly frightened and confused elderly woman onto the same flight that I was boarding, and it seemed to me that they were giving like detailed travel instructions to someone who was being launched out to fly solo for the very first time, and I was right. That's exactly what was going on. The aged woman who had never even traveled from her village, let alone been on an airplane, didn't speak a word of English and was being stuck on a plane to go stay with family all the way in Chicago. And so I kind of asserted myself in the situation. I told the family that I was flying to Chicago too, and I offered my help just to make sure that Grandma, sorry, my glasses are all schmutzy. I can't see anything that's on my notes. Like, what's going on? Oh, I know what's going on. This is professionalism at the height. All right, so anyway, I said, I can help Grandma make sure she gets all the way to Chicago because that's where I'm going. And so they gratefully accepted, and they explained to Grandma that I would help her on her journey. I grabbed her carry-on bag. We boarded the plane together. I helped her find her seat. I asked a flight attendant if I could be moved so I could sit next to Grandma. And Grandma and I spent about the next 12 hours or so traveling halfway across the planet together. Neither one of us ever understood a single word the other spoke. She understood absolutely no English, and I couldn't even recognize her alphabet. That's really bad. When it's like, is that a letter? I can't tell, let alone speak her, speak her language. And so I showed her my passport to, show that I was from America. Probably obvious. She figured that one out, but she did the same. So she showed me her passport, and I figured out, and then only with great difficulty, that she was from Armenia. So, well, anyway, on the ground in Chicago, I grabbed her carry-on bag, we deplaned, I guided her through the international terminal to customs, where I pointed her to the line for non-U.S. citizens, and there Grandma and I parted ways, delivered safe and sound to where she needed to go. And it was really just a very, very simple thing for me to take notice of the fear and the confusion that was going on around me and to offer a friendly helping hand. It was a very simple thing. And this is our point of connection. I think the world around us has become a very uncertain, a very volatile, and a very threatening place. And I think a lot of people around us are feeling a lot like Grandma Armenian, this Armenian grandma, frightened, confused, uncertain of where this flight is going to take them, and uncertain if they're going to make it there alive. And I think many people, more so than maybe any other time in our lifetimes, they're really open and perhaps even secretly wishing for a friendly helping hand that will reach out and say, hey, can I help you get to where you need to go? And it's honestly a very, very simple thing for us as the followers of Christ to take notice of the fear and the confusion around us, the uncertainty around us, and offer a friendly helping hand. And so in this Everyday Kind of Love message series, we've been looking at Jesus' example of stepping into world history, of stepping into people's lives and offering a friendly helping hand to help deliver people to where they need to go. And this is what we've seen quickly by way of review from Jesus' example. In John 1:14, we read the word, so the Word, it's Jesus we're talking about, became human and made his home among us. And so Jesus began his life of offering a friendly helping hand by simply being a flesh and blood human being and spending time camping out with people where they lived. Or where they live. And so for us, showing everyday kind of love to the people around us begins with simply being fully present with people where they are. So be fully present. That's our first point by way of review. And then be kind. John 1:14 goes on to say that Jesus was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. And so in a word, Jesus was kind. And so for us, everyday kind of love is demonstrated to the people around us through simple kindness, through acts of compassion, through good work. So let's be kind to those around us. And lastly, by way of review, we've seen that everyday kind of love is demonstrated in listening well. In listening well. We saw that this is a God value, and we saw it in verses like Psalm 62:8, which says, "Oh, my people, trust in Him, trust in God at all times. Pour out your heart to Him, for God is our refuge." And so God invites us to trust Him with what's really going on inside of our hearts, because He's a refuge. We're told He's a safe space to get real. And so for us then, listening well to the people around us means being a safe space for people to pour out their hearts, for people to feel safe to get real with us. Listening well means asking them questions, asking good questions. And listening well means following up with the things that they share with us. And so if you're talking to the food server at the restaurant, say, "Hey, how are you really doing with everything that's going on?" And they open up a little bit, they show you a little bit, follow up. Next time you're in there, say, ask how you're doing with what's going on. And so, everyday kind of love is demonstrated in being fully present, being kind, and listening well. And so today what we're going to see is that everyday kind of love is also expressed through the gift of affirmation. Now, I don't know about you, but affirmation is one of those words and concepts that I know what it is when I experience it, but I don't really know how to define affirmation. Anybody else? It's like, well, I know what it is, I just don't know what words to use to describe it. And so if you can't identify, I want to begin with a dictionary definition. Dictionary defines affirmation in the middle of the screen as to validate, to confirm, supporting the value of something or someone. And then we're told that it derives from a Latin word. I was going to say I slept through Latin. I didn't even take Latin to sleep through it. I slept through signing up to take Latin. So I have no idea what that word is, but we're told that this word from which affirmation derives means toward, to strengthen towards. And so we can think of affirming other people as aiming strength towards them by validating, by confirming their value. Adding strength towards another person by validating or confirming their value. I said a couple weeks ago that listening well to others is actually one of the highest forms of affirmation, because when we listen to people, and we know this from experience from when we're listening to, that when we listen to another person, we actually invite them to exist. We validate their personhood. But when we take this next step of affirmation that I'm talking about this morning, we do more than just acknowledge their personhood. We confirm that there is value in their personhood. Not just acknowledge that they're a person, but we confirm, we support, we add strength to the value of their personhood. And I think we all know from personal experience, hopefully we all know, the power of affirmation, the strength that we feel when somebody calls the good that they see in us out of us, when they validate our value. I'll never forget till the day I die a short little sentence that my fifth grade teacher penned on the outer envelope of my report card on the last day of fifth grade. Mr. Stuckey, for those of you who remember Mr. Stuckey, he saw something in me that I did not see in myself, and his words strengthened my sense of value. His words strengthened the way I saw myself. And as a result of those 5 little words, this little 10-year-old boy walked around a little bit taller because of those words of affirmation. Affirmation is powerful. And unfortunately, probably most of us, if not all of us, know from personal experience the power of disaffirmation, right? The opposite of affirmation. Some of us will never forget till the day we die words that were spoken over us that invalidated our value, right? As people, words that weakened us instead of strengthened us. And so we know from experience that affirmation's polar opposite, rejection, right, is very powerful too. And the Bible tells us as much in Proverbs 18:21. The tongue is the power of both life and death. And so our words of affirmation that we speak to others can breathe life into them, or our words of disaffirmation, our words of rejection can kill. Disaffirmation is like a kill shot to the heart. And our words of affirmation, we're told in Proverbs 12:25, says this: an anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. The Hebrew word that is translated anxious here, it's da'agah, for those of you who want to get nerdy on words, da'agah. It conveys this really complex sense of this very heavy, anxious, right? You ever felt heavy anxious, like first time you went on a roller coaster or had to preach a sermon? But heavy anxiety combined with fear. Da'agah, heavy, anxious fear. And I think that sounds a lot like the way people feel today. Hearts are heavily weighed down by da'agah, heavy, anxious fear. But God tells us in His Word that a kind word, literally a good word, an affirming word, it cheers, it actually lightens a heavy heart. And that's what everyday kind of love is like. Our affirming words can cheer, it can lighten the hearts of people around us that are heavily weighed down with anxiety, huge anxiety that's combined with fear. And so our words of affirmation, listen to this, our words of affirmation can not only touch a person's heart, but they can change a person's heart. Not just touch, but change a person's heart. The tongue has the power of life. Kind words, good words, words of affirmation lighten heavy hearts. And so, church, let's be life givers in the words we speak. Let's be life speakers in a world that's full of death speakers. Right? In a world that's full of death speakers, let's be the voices that speak life. Let's be heart cheerers. Let's be heart strengtheners with the words we speak. Let's be people who validate the value of others. Validate the value of people around us. And that's exactly what we see, by the way, when we follow Jesus through the Gospel of John. And so I want to take a quick look at some snapshots of Jesus validating the people he encounters. And so in John 1:14, as we've seen over the last several weeks, Jesus becomes a flesh and blood human being. He camps out with where people live, and we're told that that people experience Jesus as full of unfailing love and faithfulness. So that's John 1:14. Then a couple verses later in John 1:42, Jesus encounters Simon. First encounter with Simon. And Simon, we know from the rest of the story, was this hot-headed, windbag fisherman who talked really big and failed even bigger. This is Simon. So listen to what Jesus says to Simon the first time he meets this loser. Then Andrew brought Simon to Jesus to meet Jesus, and looking intently at Simon, Jesus said, "Your name is Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas," which means Peter. Now, what you may know is the Aramaic name Cephas and the Greek name Peter both mean rock. And so, in other words, the very first thing that Jesus did when he met this hot-headed windbag loser was he gave him a nickname. "Hey, Rocky! Rocky!" Right? And that's not who he was, but that was what Jesus called out of him. That's what Jesus saw in him. And that's the identity Peter grew into. A loser who actually did indeed become the rock. And so affirmation, listen to this, church, affirmation doesn't judge by outward appearances the way we are naturally inclined to do. Right? Affirmation looks at the heart. Affirmation looks at potential and validates the value that it sees there, and it speaks life, and it speaks strength. And so just take a moment of personal reflection. Do you know any Simons? Right? Do you ever run into people that, judging by their external appearances, you would sooner write off as a Simon kind of loser? We do, right? That's the way they look to us. Well, what would it look like for us as followers of Jesus to, like Jesus, to validate the value of the Simons around us with words of affirmation? What would that look like? All right, next snapshot, a couple verses later, Jesus meets a cynical skeptic named Nathanael, and you know the type. Nathanael was the kind of guy who could see the dark cloud on every silver lining, right? The glass is half empty. I think it's more than half empty kind of guy. And so listen to what Jesus says to this pessimistic cynic on their very first meeting. And so as they approached, Nathanael and Andrew, I think it was, approaching with them, Jesus said, "Now here," speaking of Nathanael, "here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity." And so Jesus saw this guy, Jesus saw this man whose strength, which was a passion for the right, a passion for the truth, to be specific, his personality strength had become a really obnoxious personality trait. You know anybody like that? If they're next to you, just nod subtly. Yeah. All right. This strength, this passion for the truth had undoubtedly become this personality weakness that probably pushed people away from Nathanael. And isn't that what our personality strengths do when they're out of balance? It pushes people away because we're just obnoxious in our strengths. But Jesus validated the value that he saw in who Nathanael was, and that's exactly what validation does. It just takes notice of what is good in the person, and it calls it out of them, and it speaks life and strength. And so again, reflect on this. Do you know any Nathanaels? You know, either they're pessimistic or cynical or skeptics, or they just have incredible strengths, but those strengths just drive you nuts because it's out of balance. So what would it look like for us as Christ followers to, like Jesus, validate the value of the Nathanaels around us with words of affirmation? All right, a couple more quick snapshots. I'm not going to take time to explain much of these, but I just want to track with Jesus in linear order as he encounters people with a helping hand. So first we have the Samaritan woman, 5 husbands, and now living with another man. And yet Jesus called value out of this societal reject in offering her a friendly helping hand, and Jesus brought her safe and sound to where she needed to go, right? Next snapshot, the royal official, a privileged bureaucrat. Royal official, a politician. Yet Jesus confirmed the value on this one so despised by society by offering a healing hand to his dying child. Next snapshot, the beggar at the pool of Bethesda. All right? An invalid for 38 years, entrenched in a complete victim mentality, and yet Jesus heals this welfare parasite. So value and confirm value to this welfare parasite. Next snapshot, Simon the Zealot. You may know this. The zealots of Jesus' time were the Antifa of our time. I'm just telling you, that's the way it is. That's what they did, to the point of murder. Yet Jesus called this social radical to be one of his 12 disciples, Simon the Zealot. Next snapshot, the woman caught in adultery. John 8. Jesus extends a hand of mercy and forgiveness to this fallen woman, a woman who lacked discretion. And so in each of these snapshots, and many more we could look at if we just track with Jesus through the Gospel of John, Jesus extends. He first of all takes notice of the people around him, and he validates their value, and he extends a friendly helping hand. To individuals who were devalued by society and rejected by society, Jesus saw value. And in each case, they were healed, and they were delivered, and they were brought to where they ultimately needed to go. And so what would it look like, church, if we, the followers of Jesus, like Jesus, took notice of those around us, we spoke affirming words into them, called value out of them? And what if we did that to the societal rejects, the society radicals, the societal reprobates, with everyday kind of love? So that brings us to a very important and difficult and practical question, and that's this. I think it's on the next slide. How do we affirm the value of someone when we completely disagree with them? That's a really good question, isn't it? How do you affirm the value of them when you completely disagree with them? I think that's a good question. I think we'll talk about that next week. And that's where we're going to end. Come on up, guys. So while the worship team is coming forward, so first of all, I want to issue our weekly challenge. We've been just challenging ourselves as a congregation to leave the doors here on Sunday morning and take this everyday kind of love to the streets, to the people we're praying for on our My Five cards, the people we work with, people in our neighborhoods. And I think today's challenge is just very similar to the challenge we had a couple weeks ago. Just look for an opportunity to speak words of life-giving value into somebody this week. Take notice of them and just speak words of life-giving value. All right, let's stand together before we sing last song. And after the song, Sheldon's going to come up and lead us in ministry time. But as I was preparing this sermon, I actually somewhat unexpectedly felt like the Lord laid two things on my heart that you might find applies to you and you want to respond to it this morning. So I talked earlier about, disaffirming word, rejecting words that are like kill shots. I remember that. And I just felt like the Lord wants to bring healing to somebody, maybe several people here. You were on the receiving end of a kill shot word. Somebody spoke something about you, they spoke it into you, they called it out of you, and it was like a bullet straight to the head, a bullet straight to the heart. A kill shot word. And so if that's you, I just encourage you to raise your hand, have somebody pray for you, have the ministry team, have one of the staff pastors pray for you. Kill shot word. All right, here's a tougher one to respond to. Some of you might be aware that you were the deliverer of a kill shot word. You spoke a kill shot word. And I just want to invite you during this time of response and reflection to ask the Lord, what do I do with what I did? And it might be hard to take the step that the Lord calls you to take. You understand what I'm saying? Because I think what he might invite us to do is to go heal the damage we did. All right, so if you were on the receiving end of a kill shot word, I think the Lord wants to undo the damage. And if you were on the giving end of a kill shot word, I think the Lord wants to do some work in you to help you undo the damage. Okay? So let me just say a word of prayer, and then the team's going to lead us in a response song.